And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And if you go along, after during the 20s, I'll say, leading up to Negro History Week, which was officially announced in 1925, although in August, I think it was 1925, even though it was actually practiced and introduced in February 1926 was the first month. But long before it actually happened, people were announcing it. But if you look at 1925, when Mr. Garvey was wrongfully convicted of a crime he did not and could not have committed in 1925, and just as a quick segue, justiceforgarvey.org petition is going around. There are many people throughout the world who want to see Mr. Garvey's name cleared, a political exoneration through a full presidential pardon, admitting his innocence. So in order to support that petition is going to the White House. Go to Justice, JUSTICE, the number 4, and GARVEY.org. Justiceforgarvey.org. Now back to the point. In 1925, Mr. Garvey wrote the famous whirlwind message. If you think about the whirlwind message, it was leading with a lot of historical messages in there. He talked about that the Germans really defeat the French in 1870. He talked about did Napoleon really conquer Europe? And these were questions dealing with time, dealing with the history, dealing with how things historically move. It's always evolving. It's a dynamic, function. So if mentioning these things, if this really happened, that he, conceded his defeat. But if he waited on time and was patient, he would be vindicated with time. And that history is something you had to learn in order to understand what he was actually talking about. But he also talked about he will write the history that will inspire the millions. And I'm here to say that he not only wrote about the history that inspired the millions, he made the history that inspired the millions. And so when we talk about this happening in 1925 as well, in the African fundamentalism and the whirlwind message in February 1925, here comes August, and Carter Woodson now, with this momentum, this growth of excitement in the study of our history emerging everywhere, introduces Negro History Week, which is certainly quickly supported by the Garvey movement, the Negro World, etc. And it's celebrated the following year, 1926. And Carter G continued the relationship, submitting articles to the Negro World, etc. In fact, he later introduced much of his miseducation of the Negro through pages of the Negro World, week by week. And so, there was a lot of momentum building up to the rise of Negro History Week as a celebration itself. Now, I want to go more into what is Negro history, since we're talking about celebrating it. Well, some would say just Negro history is just the history of Negroes themselves, of our civilizations, of our accomplishments, of some of our challenges, etc. Some would even say that slavery and colonization, which discourages a lot of people from studying our history, is not even part of our history. That is actually an obstruction of our history or disruption of our history. But it is part of our history. It should not define us. It should not be something that we have to, wallow in and be ashamed of, because every race suffered setbacks along the way toward the advancement of their civilization. So it's nothing to be ashamed of. However, we must acknowledge the history. As a later day Garveyite would say, Dr. John Henry Clark, history is a clock that people use to tell their political and cultural time of day. It is the compass they use to find themselves on the map of human geography. And so when you think about geography and you think about direction and this, compass, you think about, say if I were in Jamaica and I wanted to know how to get from the Bob Marley Museum to the Liberty Hall Museum, and I asked someone for directions, they, if they didn't know where I was in the beginning, they couldn't know how to direct me. If I just say, hey, I'm here, send me there. You'd have to know where I'm going. You'd have to know which direction I'm facing. So you can say, hey, go straight, take a left, do this, do that, and the other. But without that compass, without that knowledge of where I came from, you don't know where I'm going and how I'm getting there. So we have to understand the roots. As Mr. Garvey would say, quoted by Dr. Clark, that people without a knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is certainly like a tree without roots. So anyway, history is important in that vein. Malcolm X, also would say that of all our studies, history is best qualified to reward our research. So, and we all know also people who don't learn from their history are often doomed to repeat the mistakes of the history. So we got to be mindful of the things that we accomplished great, as well as the things that weren't so great, and how long it may have taken us to accomplish these things. And in fact, that was what attracted me initially to the Garvey movement, because it was a time when Black people were able to organize in mass in millions. And if you want to see what it would be like to do that again, you have to see how we did it and what we did when we were organized on that mass scale before. It's something I always say to people, that a common definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. Well, the flip side of that also means that the sanity is doing the same thing and expecting the same result. And so if we want what we had, we got to do what we did. In order to do that, we have to study the past and learn from it. And history taught us many lessons, as Mr. Garvey taught about having a solid industrial foundation. That without a solid industrial foundation, we're nothing more than a race of cultural tramps in the political gutter of the world, walking around dressed up in other people's civilization. So we want to learn from our history, learn not to repeat the mistakes, but to learn from the triumphs and the greatness and the glory of our glorious past. And we can talk a lot about that, because Mr. Garvey, again, of African fundamentalism, one of the favorite sections of that I like is when he talks about our glorious history, the history we should be proud of. And in fact, if you know your history and know your heritage, then you can appreciate more and have pride in your identity. Well, one of the things that Mr. Garvey pointed out was when we were embracing the arts and sciences on the banks of the Nile, other people's ancestors were still drinking human blood, eating out of the skulls of their conquered dead. When our civilization had reached a new day of progress, they were still running naked and sleeping in holes and caves with rats, bats, and other insects and animals. After we had already fathomed the mystery of the stars and reduced the heavenly constellation to minute regular calculus, they were still backwoodsmen living in ignorance and blatant darkness. African people and African civilizations long ago have accomplished great things and led the world. Many of the sciences that are now being credited by other races of people were actually initiated in Africa and initiated by Africans who were transported to these other countries against their will. So much of American technology is actually African technology that African people couldn't get credit for, etc. So learning that history helps empower us to know what we are capable of, what we can do, and where we're going. And which leads me kind of to one of my final points. Another thing Dr. Clark mentioned was history is not everything, but it is a starting point, which is quite similar to something Mr. Garvey once said, that we can learn from the past, but we can't live in the past. Now, you can't count yesterday's points on today's scoreboard. If we want to learn from history, we got to make the history now. And we can learn and learn and learn and study until we're blue in the face, but if we're not doing anything to make a new history, our history is going to start to look weaker and weaker as the years go past. But if we start to work now in the present with a view toward the future, within the moments of time, our history is going to look that much better and our future is going to look that much brighter, because we're working in the now. So that's pretty much concludes. I'm trying to keep within the 15-minute. Y'all know sometimes I can be a bit of a motor mouth and I don't want to talk too long, but I appreciate that. If there's any questions, shoot them.
You actually spoke somewhat about Negro History Week. How did it catapult into History Month? And can you tell the viewers a little bit more about that transition?
Yeah, initially, Dr. Carter G. Woodson and others founded the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History in 1915. In 1916, they had established the Journal of Negro History, which began to educate, the public about some of the great accomplishments of legendary figures of Black history, etc. And as the movement began to gain momentum and traction, eventually, again, as Garvey movement was on the rise, and millions of people throughout the world had an audience for this Black history. Dr. Carter G. Woodson in 1926 established Negro History Week. It continued on as Negro History Week for some time, long after he died, I think in 1950, and it continued on up until, I think, if I'm correct, on this 1970, I think is when the Kent State college students actually figured that a week wasn't enough time to celebrate our history. And so they chose the whole month of February to be Negro History Month. And that began to get on and build momentum until in 1976, President Gerald Ford officially declared that February would be Negro History Month. And so it became, a presidentially sanctioned or proclaimed celebration for us. And so, and then, they begin to play with the name Negro history, Black history, African American history. But it's a month for us to celebrate us. And, it's still evolving. And we have, in Garvey movement, every day is African history or Negro history day. So we don't separate, but we also recommend people at some point study the history, not just of us, but the history of the world and the history of others and their interaction with us, because that helps us understand a lot about ourselves and we're beyond this clock, this historical clock that Mr. Garvey mentioned and that Dr. Clark referenced. So that we'll know, where we're moving, how fast we're moving, how efficiently we're moving, and how to keep moving forward.
And that was what I wanted to bring up. Knowing where we came from will definitely define where we're going. And as a people, what kind of advice would you give us across the globe on how to gather some of this information? Because we know there's a rise in academic interest in Garvey, Marcus Garvey and his legacy. But at this point, where are some of the access points and information you can tell our viewers?
Yes, man. There's in this information age, information is so readily available. There's virtually no excuse for us not learning everything there is to know about our history going back for millennia. We have, certainly right here in Washington, where I am, Library of Congress has a plethora of collections and studies of history. There are certainly many research libraries and many collections, like, even last session I saw, we were talking about Amy Ashwood Garvey, which, by the way, is a historical note. Today is also the 75th anniversary of Amy Ashwood Garvey's visit to Ghana, where she discovered her family connection and actually was, welcomed into the Ashanti. So if you see that picture of her with the Ashanti Henny and the Queen Mother, that happened on this day 75 years ago. So I guess Bob Marley wasn't around yet, but 2 years later he was born. But yeah, there's a number of resources.
No, it was 75. No, it was 75 years ago. He was 2 years old.
Oh, he was born.
He's 77 today.
Oh, he was old. You're right. He was 2 years old. Exactly. Yeah, thanks. See, I know history. I don't know math that
way. Mr. Golding had his hand up.
Oh yeah. But yeah, that's it's important to know those dates. They give us a time frame for seeing what was happening and how to resurrect that magic again. Because things always happen with a certain rhythm, a certain momentum and movement. And if we don't know how to generate it, if we haven't seen it happen before, then we can't see when it's happening again and how to capitalize on it, or how to generate and make that happen. But yeah.
And another source I'd like to let everyone know of is, of course, the Liberty Hall Museum, Legacy of Marcus Garvey, 76 King Street, and that's right here downtown Kingston. We do have a library with over 10,000 books and articles, digital media, a multimedia museum, and space where we can actually gather and learn that information. And of course, a gift store if anyone wants to buy any memorabilia. So just to let everyone know, there is a plethora of information out there. Mr. Golding, did you have your hand up, or did you want to? Hello?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I would have to say that anyone who says that it wasn't would be dishonest, because Mr. Garvey popularized on a mass scale like nobody before or after has been able to. The study of our history, the appreciation of our history. In fact, they used to call him the apostle of new thought among the Negro. But he was one who, well, he's the one that popularized the J.A. Rogers and Carter G. Woodson's on the international scale long before, other newspapers were getting outside of America. The Negro World was not only, teaching the history in English, but it was teaching it in French and Spanish and every, other language it can get into. So, the countries, was going internationally. People were sneaking it into Africa and places where folks didn't otherwise have access to the knowledge and history and information and excitement about our past. So a lot of that has to be credited with Mr. Garvey's rise, certainly, and his message and advocacy for Africa, and his tales of Ethiopia. He was certainly a collector of Ethiopian art, as we found out when he spoke at Howard University, and he had afterwards met with uh, what's his name, Hansberry, William Leo Hansberry, who was a collector himself and an archaeologist, etc. And they went over, his office and looking at the Ethiopian vase from back in different dynasties, etc. But Mr. Garvey was one. It probably was rooted in him. I'm thinking also when he was young, as a young child of a Maroon who had a library that was so extensive. It was known to be the largest in the community, and he got Mr. Garvey as a young man consumed every book that his father had in that library, so much that he can tell folks about to pick a word in the dictionary and see if anyone can find a word that he didn't know. So that kind of studiousness created that superlative genius that orchestrated the golden age of universal African nationalism. So as his progenitor, I would have to say that his message, his movement, the excitement, that sparked this Harlem Renaissance, the whole aesthetic that Dr. Tony Martin used to talk a lot about when he, brought out certain books of literary works during the era of Mr. Garvey's founding of the UNIA in the early years, etc. It had to have a considerable role in popularizing the study of African history, and certainly many of those greats like J.A. Rogers were. I can't say he was a rank and file member, but he was one of the editors for the Daily Negro Times. He used to always interview Marcus. In fact, no, that wasn't the interview, but he used to interview Amy Ashley Wood, Garvey, others in the Garvey movement all the time. Not too many other people would they allow to interview them, but J.A. Rogers and others. But there was a lot of great historians who came, like Dr. John Henry Clark and others, who were, admittedly Garveyites. Dr. Ben certainly was considered a Garveyite, and other, historians even in Africa and abroad, the Jomos and the other scholars and students who later, took political office were inspired and became students. I never heard too much about Sheikh Anta Diop, but certainly other people were, whether they openly acknowledge their inspiration. It certainly has to be credited to Mr. Garvey, who was the standard bearer of success under duress, blessed to do far more with less, in my humble opinion. If that answers some of your questions. Mm-hmm.
No, it definitely did. Mr. Golden?
Yeah, and also many of the members of ASCAC, by the way, now that I think about it, like the Jacob Carruthers and many of the people who ASCAC is the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilization. Dr. Clark and many others were also, Garveyites, were members of that institution. So a lot of its origin, the excitement, some of the early African history societies were formed by prominent Garveyites, even like Willis Huggins and some others, which is Dr. Clark's primary teacher back in the day. Who wound up starting the African newspaper, the African Opinion, the University of Ethiopian Student Association, which is an outgrowth of the UNIA. But we can go on for days talking about, Garvey's contribution to that, but it's undeniable. No one's ever denied it. Even Chancellor Williams had a glowing testimony to his influence and inspiration by Mr. Garvey. He's one of my favorite historians, along with Dr. Tony Martin and others, and Professor Rupert Lewis.
Yes. Salute to him.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Yeah, but history. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Uh, right. Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, well, many of the early Ethiopianists were again inspired by Mr. Garvey, like we know Leonard Percival, Howe, and others. But yeah, certainly, Mr. Garvey and the Honorable Arnold Josiah Ford, who was the lyricist who wrote the Universal Ethiopian Anthem, which is the official anthem of our race universally. He wrote that, and before repatriating to Sashimani with his family, he hailed by way of Barbados, but he penned that, which was actually became, he and Lee Burrell wrote the song or the music, but they yes, sir. Yeah, right. Yeah, but yeah, I mean that later became the foundation for the current anthem, or the future anthem of the country of Ethiopia. Um, so I mean there was also certainly the 1922 convention. We see the letter that Emperor Haile Selassie wrote to the UNIA and delivered by the way of the Persian consul. And the letter, I think, is posted on the Marcus Garvey Cultural Club page, but it had a letter of welcome and support for the UNIA that the Emperor Haile Selassie had, and he was inviting members of the association to come to the continent. We see, not only Ford, but other people like the Black Eagle, who was head of the Black Eagle Flying Corps, the UNIA. I would say Colonel, but I forgot his last rank. But anyway, Hubert Fauntleroy Jr., aka the Black Eagle, who hailed from Trinidad, went there, became the first air marshal of Ethiopia, and helped the country, training some of the pilots, learn how to fight during the Italian-Ethiopian War. But you had a lot of Garveyites who were repatriated, and certainly many who, would later join the Rastafari movement. I'm thinking it was named after Leah Rogers, who wrote in the Holy Pivy that Mr. Garvey was, apostle along with Henrietta Davis and Poston, Robert Lincoln Poston, contribute toward the Ethiopianness connection to the Garvey movement. Certainly the red, black, and green was the inspiration behind the flag, with the red, black, gold, and green. And of course, the Howlites, in Florida still rocking the red, black, and green. Shout out to Catherine Howe, the daughter of the Tough Gong. But there's a lot of connection between, Ethiopia certainly, and the UNIA, and always has been, and that's why now we're even trying to establish, implement at the African Union headquarters in Ethiopia a statue dedicated to Mr. Garvey, who was the catalyst behind this, idea of the United States of Africa, and the AU itself, and the OAU, partly founded by Nkrumah and other Garveyites. Yes, Nkrumah was a card-carrying dues band member of the Philly division, along with Ezekwe and some other folks back in the day, who later fought for Africans' independence. So, but yeah, it was a heavy part. Even though there was some political rift later with Mr. Garvey and Haile Selassie, Mr. Garvey never stopped loving Ethiopia and the people of Ethiopia, even if he had some, political differences with, some of the folks in office. So you look at even in one of his poems, what was it, Ross Nasibu of Ogaden? Powerful poem he did. Matter of fact, y'all should read that one if y'all have that one. But I mean, Mr. Garvey he loved Africa and African people, so he was the one who implemented the idea of African redemption, which he considered the Great Commission, not only to recover Africa for the Africans, but to rescue the souls of Africa's sons and daughters from social, political, economic, and spiritual bondage, and restore them to a ground of vantage to secure the true uplift of our race and the good of the human family. So, you definitely can't even talk about Africa without talking some kind of way about the root of this African redemption movement that sparked the African-centric movement, the Black Power movement, the Harlem Renaissance, and everything else that can be traced back to Mr. Garvey and the early Garveyites.
Well, the music that was inspired, of course, the link between Rastafari and Marcus Garvey, music reggae, obviously is indicative of not just the struggle, but the importance that Garvey laid on music to spread the word to the people and to bind us together and to move us or inspire us as one, right? And I want to touch on that considerably because, of course, today is Bob's birthday. And I found something by Harvard grad, Keto J. Swan. Are you familiar with him?
Yeah, yes. Yeah, I know Keto.
So he says, listen to the music. February 6th marks the birthday of Bob Marley. Born in Jamaica in 1945, the reggae icon would be witnessing his 77th, I'm actually changing the dates, the 77th birthday today, if he were alive. Over the next month or so, Marley fans will be celebrating the music and life of this legend. While not a man without fault, the Tough Gong used his music as a tool of anti-colonialism. Marley was a cultural ambassador for Rastafari, Black liberation, and Pan-Africanism. His poetic lyrics set a troubled world on fire, defended Black self-determination, and urged the African world to unite. It is thus of little surprise that Marley was subject to state-sponsored violence. Marley's birthday week is an opportune time to revisit not only his legacy, but more importantly, the Black tradition and the legacy of Marcus Messiah Garvey. Marley was heavily influenced by the life and lessons of Marcus Messiah Garvey. Scholars like Rupert Lewis have demonstrated how, in addition to His Majesty Haile Selassie, Marley's music featured quotes from Garvey. Take, for example, the popular phrase from Marley's redemption song, "Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our mind." That phrase was taken from a 1937 Garvey speech. So on a whole, I would like to refer to this article later, but it definitely speaks of marriage between Marcus Garvey and the music from the 1970s through Burning Spear right through to Peter Tosh, obviously, Bob Marley, Junior Gong, Bush on right through to 2000s, right? And the effort that everyone actually used or took to evoke Marcus Garvey through reggae. You have to know it is.
Yeah.
music is his anthem, and it's definitely something, it's a vessel for us to continue spreading the knowledge out there, or continue just talking, conversing, and uniting us. So I definitely wanted to give homage to Bob today, because it's his birthday, and to highlight that fusion, because it is very important that music is still available to us today to use as a vessel and to use for the betterment of our people. I don't know whether or not we're doing as well as we should with it, but definitely it's still there. So we want to pay homage to that.
Yeah, well, Idlewild Park was a hot spot for early musicians in the Garvey movement, and those who were playing to the Garvey movement. So Mr. Garvey was an early producer of talent of that sort that led to musical rise in Jamaica. But also, Bob Marley was, if I'm correct, he was born in St. Anne's and moved and lived in Kingston, just like Mr. Garvey. So, and he was right in the midst of Kingston 12. At the time in the 70s, they had a division, what they used to call it the Whitfield Division before, it's now the Kingston Division. But the Whitfield Division had 1,000 members back in the 70s when Mr. Bob was, coming up. So he had to be influenced, by a movement that size and that caliber. And certainly is reflected in his music and, his love for Africa. So, I don't think he would deny any of that if he were around today to smell his flowers and see the great works he's done. And, definitely nothing but love for Bob Marley and the Marley family.
Definitely that.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Yeah, y'all got me wanting to listen to some Bob Marley now. and I hear Bernie Spears coming to town. I don't know if he's coming to DC, but he's about to do a 10-city tour. And I think I want to throw DC on that map to see if we can get him over here.
That would be awesome.
We might be in the citadel of white supremacy, but I tell you, Mr. Garvey erected an African empire, the citadel of white supremacy. So we can certainly set a nice welcoming committee ready for the Burning Spear that goes to Garvey to come through. But Garveyism is strong in DC. Mr. Garvey's alive and well.
Amen. All right. Mr. Golding, do you have anything to add, or you with us?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Basically.
And I mean, I was gonna say certainly reggae, but you also had some folks in the States, who have been and are still talking. Everybody from Jay-Z and AZ and
Lauren, Dead Prez,
back to Warriors, Red, Black, and Green. If you think about it, you know what I mean.
Yeah. We had Most Def and Talib Kweli, the Black Star.
Remember? Yeah, exactly.
Right. You had that.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, and many of the early, if you look at the Jazz Hounds, the Black Star Musical Detachment, some of the bands that would always follow in parade and perform at mass meetings. I mean, some of those greats like Nana Primpe's brother, Milton Kelly, brother, Wynton Kelly was a popular musician. Even who was popular in the jazz community. They grew up playing recitals at the UNIA mass meetings. People like Not Frank Weston, that's his father. Randy Weston, another pianist who wrote about the African roots of music and rhythm, was a famous musician. Oscar Peterson, all kinds of, musical legends were heavily influenced by Garvey, coming up through the years and all different genres of music. It's almost no genre you can go to that some prominent Garveyites weren't involved and connected, you know. And I was just thinking about the dancing preacher who spoke at the International Convention in 22, Reverend Julius Caesar Austin, who people confuse with Prophet Noble Drew Ali. But even he, the dancing preacher, later invited Tom Dorsey into the church, who was the father of modern gospel music. But if you really did a serious historiographical research on the impact of Garveyism and how that contributed to the music and to the atmosphere and the love, of African people all, globally. I don't think it'd be a limit, to the research. It is going to eternity, because this was an organization that Mr. Garvey said was 6 to 11 million people. But realistically, that was out of the 1,100 divisions that were stated. There was another 1,000 divisions in South Africa that we don't know how many members they had. It could have been easy another million. And according to the League of Nations, where he was submitting documents, they had documented 2,200 divisions. So even like with the pardon, Mr. Garvey first got incarcerated. Within the first 2 weeks, 3 million people had submitted a letter to the pardon attorney's office. I mean, we trying to get 100,000 signatures now for to get a presidential pardon. I mean, we had the numbers back then without the internet, without cell phones, without faxes. And, this is incredible, the work that was being done. And it was all being done, the orchestration primarily of one man who had a magic formula. And that magic formula is how he did. Y'all want to know what the magic formula was from Mr. Garvey? I'm going to show you right now. I don't normally share this. This is the world premiere of Mr. Garvey's magic formula. I'm going to put it online. Y'all see that?
Signature?
No. It's the magic formula. Make a Garveyite a Garveyite. They say the 3 most powerful elements in Africa come out of Africa: bauxite, tanzanite, and a Garveyite. And this right here is the element of Garveyism. You know what it means? It means put your butt on the line. It means sacrifice. It means put more love in your heart, more heart in your love. It was conviction that Mr. Garvey had, the power of his conviction. It made everything happen. Don't share my secret with everybody now. It's just between us. But Garvey that's where your head was going.
Not sure.
Yes, indeed. But yeah, we have a long, strong, proud history of Garveyites all over the world. Really, we just knew what we were able to do in just a short period of time. Imagine what we could do. Even today with this technology we have at our disposal, the industrialized Africa and technologically advanced Africa. I'm sick of hearing about the Royal Academy of Math and Science in Europe and not seeing the Royal Academy of African Science. Where's our science? We built the pyramids before they were even, walking around on 2 legs. Yet somehow we can't develop, our own scientific strategies to solve some of the problems facing Africa, some of the disease, some of the technology issues, that people are dying from all over the place. It's just sad how we don't apply the lessons we learned from the history of the Garvey movement today like we ought to. That's why I always, again, call him the standard bearer of success under duress, who was blessed to do far more with less. And if we just learn some simple lessons, man, we'd be light years ahead of where we are today. Light years. Yeah. Well, you almost need black supremacy to offset white supremacy. It's kind of like Malcolm said when he was growing up, he heard the N word so much he thought it was his name. And so he tried to balance that off by, talking about our greatness. And, the process, if you look at um, supremacy, that means above or over. And genetically, when you look at our race, when you have say a white and a black person have relations, the child genetically has a dominant gene and a recessive gene. Is scientifically stronger, the melanated, stronger individuals. Some people say our lights receive because they're black and brown versus the blue and other colors, that they can process information faster as data. Because when you look at an object, it's the light that bounces off an object that hits your retina and processes. So, some people say there's some scientific data to support greater functionality amongst those who are heavily melanated. And there's probably some historical data that would support some of that. So, I mean, every race should feel themselves supreme. Like every football, basketball team feels they're the best. Ain't no reason to be apologizing. That's how you feel. Nothing wrong with it. I mean, it's different from going out and oppressing somebody or exterminating millions of people because you think you supreme and they're degenerates. But if you feel you are the best, why shouldn't you feel the best? If you feel you're a loser, I guarantee you're going to become one. So if you think yourself a winner, you think yourself the greatest, like Muhammad Ali and others, why shouldn't you? I support that 100,000%. We need to understand our greatness in that level. And Hitler was he was a fascist, which again was prone not toward even though he was Germany was occupied by 80 or 90% Germans, and you had a small Jewish community that was actually kind of manipulate some of the finances. But in general, you had a white German majority there that wound up doing a lot to exterminate a small minority. But African nationalism in America and Jamaica and some other places abroad is more of a defensive mechanism. It's us circumventing racism by doing for ourselves and looking out for one another. So it's not so much a anti anybody, it's more of a pro us kind of philosophy. So you can compare Garvey as being an aggressive, assertive nationalist, and knowing that in America and other places we're nations within a nation, and if we need to go to the hospital, we can't go to their hospital. We had to have our own. We couldn't join the Red Cross because it was they wouldn't admit blacks. We had to develop our own Black Cross. We wanted treatment. The Black Star Line, the White Star Line, the Green Star Line wasn't treating us fairly. We had to go in the basement and pay twice as much, etc. So it's natural for us to want to aspire to be the greatest, and in order to feel that way, you got to think that way. And so I have no apology for that.
The English language is also really great, right? And as you know, you can have the same word in different contexts and it means two different things. So white supremacy and black supremacy definitely do not mean the same thing, right? If you were to look at it, the context of white supremacy obviously has a negative connotation. You identify the KKK with that, you identify oppression, redistribution of state lines right now, or redivision of state lines just for voting. I mean, you identify those things with white supremacy because the crux of it is oppression. Black supremacy, as Mario Ma said, is a defensive mechanism, but it's not just that. Marcus Garvey intended it to be race pride, right? And yes, it's a defense against slavery and being torn away from everything we know in our motherland, but it is also reclaiming what was taken away from us, right? So our history, that once we know where we came from, we know where we're going. If we didn't know it, we need to reclaim it. So that supremacy is actually learning about ourselves, accepting who we are, and then in that knowledge of self, we'll understand our supremacy. We will understand we are as good as not just anyone, but probably better based on historical fact or based on such and such. However, it's not a fact that would enable us to oppress anyone else. It's a fact that may just make us feel better about ourselves because we've been taught otherwise completely.
Right.
Black supremacy is a context that if we weren't putting it in the context of white supremacy, then it wouldn't be a negative connotations to it. It would really basically equate to race pride and equate to us embracing our history and ourselves so that we can become a better race as a group, because at this point, as you know, what our school is. And so we're looking to find ways to unite ourselves. And the way we do that is to learn about ourselves, we find strength in ourselves. We are nationalistic in every which way possible. And looking back home, united in Africa and in our history, as a people, in being united, would definitely at that point bestow that supremacy that we'd be looking for. Again, it's not one of oppression. It would just make us rise above where we actually are right now, and our stations are pretty low. So of course, rising is definitely necessary. We rise.
That's right. That's right. I agree 100,000%. Besides, I'm a Garveyite, so I believe God is black. And you know, somebody don't like that. You know, they can believe in their own God.
You know what? Any religious person knows anthropomorphization, right? And if we anthropomorphize God, who is our God? So we won't discuss that here, but it's another philosophy thing. And I know the other philosophy major on this call would definitely engage me in that one. But
that's how we're supposed to think. Hey, we made in His image. Hey, let's do it. And I think they asked Garvey that one time. You know, is God black? He said, yeah. He said, well, I thought it was invisible. He said, you're right. He said, oh, how is he black and invisible? He said, you know, through the law of anthropomorphology, that it's only right to see the divine through human attributes. Even the biblical writers talk about the whole world is in His hand, or you irritate by touching the eye of God, or you draw close to Him, and He'll draw you to His bosom, and so that bosom with that chest and that eye and these things, human attributes that characterize the Almighty. So if we're going to see those attributes in our mind's eye, we might as well see them looking like us. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. But yeah, we are supreme. And anybody want to challenge me? Let's go. I'm ready. Yes, indeed. That's what African fundamentalism was all about.
yes.
Teaching us pride. Yeah, why should we be ashamed? We were first, first on the planet and first civilizations, and rule the world great. Now all the craziness we have today. Yeah. So anyway, but yeah, definitely enjoy speaking today on this topic as well as any other topic. I can talk for hours. Steve and I often do talk for hours. So yeah. But yeah, I always love to, come on and, we can do whatever. Any other questions?
Yeah, well, first let me apologize. I guess the stream, because we were streaming live on YouTube since the start of your presentation, Mariama.
Okay.
But apparently they couldn't hear my questions. I think it's because I had the mute on, so there was no feedback here from me, sort of. So I'm just checking it now by keeping both the audios open and seeing if it improves on the stream for future knowledge.
Okay.
Apologies to the listeners because they were the ones typing on the chat that they couldn't hear my question. But hopefully they got enough from the answer to sort of situate that. But thank you much for coming on, brother, as we go into Black History Month, and for situating the UNIA, its place in terms of celebrating Black History Month, and its contribution to that content when we speak about Black history and we speak about knowing our history beyond the narrative given to us by the colonizers or the oppressors.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, it's been my pleasure, Director Thompson and Honorable President Golden. One God, our firm endeavor, one aim, most glorious bent, one destiny forever. God bless Stephen Golden, our president.
I can. Let's see. 24th actually is what we were looking at. Mhm. Mhm. All right.
Great move. Y'all gonna make me come over there soon. Yeah, definitely, definitely.